And well, hi to all of the act.tv viewers today. My name is Heidi Sieck, and I'm the Chief Empowerment Officer of Vote Pro-Choice. And I am so grateful that act.tv asked me to facilitate this discussion today about a very important election that's happening in New York City. So on June 22nd, there's a municipal primary, but it also includes a very important election for our Manhattan District Attorney. And we need to really have a conversation about that role. It's got exciting candidates, it's got a lot of money, and it's really important. So thank you to act.tv for hosting this conversation, and it is my great pleasure to introduce to all of you a candidate that Vote Pro-Choice has been delighted to endorse, and that's Tahanie Aboushi, who's running for Manhattan District Attorney. So today we're going to have a conversation about that primary that's on June 22nd and why this is so important. We're going to talk a little bit about the importance of a district attorney race in the context of reproductive justice, but most importantly, I want you all to get to know Tahanie as an incredible candidate and who will be an incredible leader for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. So Tahanie, please introduce yourself to the act.tv community. We'd love to hear a little bit about you and a little bit about this race.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me, Heidi. It's an honor to be endorsed by Vote Pro-Choice, and I'm really delighted to be here and talk about this, as you said, extremely important race. My name is Tahanie Aboushi. I am a civil rights lawyer, and for over a decade, my job has been to focus on identifying abusive policies and practices here in our city and change them. So whether it's holding police accountable or representing victims of sexual assault, I have ensured that our government is creating policies centered around empowering people and not about special favors. And it started when I was much younger and my father was sentenced to 22 years in prison. And he and my mom had to figure out how they were going to raise my 9 siblings and I right here in New York City. It was the first time I ever stepped foot in the courtroom, the first time I ever understood what the criminal justice system was. And it's why I became a lawyer. I wanted to stand by families like mine. I wanted to make our community safe, but also hold these systems of authority accountable. And so here we are, just 7 days out from Election Day. Early voting has already started, June 12th to June 20th. And a lot is on the line. This is the moral compass of our city. Regardless of who the mayor ends up being, this is an office that has to be independent from the power structures. We need to elect somebody that will put no badge or bank account above the law, and that will lead in co-governance with all of our communities, our community leaders, community-based organizations, and the impacted community to create policies that work for everyone. So I'm really excited to talk more in detail about what my plans are for this office.
So let's do some civics education out there, okay? You are running for Manhattan District Attorney. Can you give everybody an overview of what a district attorney does and how it directly impacts the lives of New Yorkers and voters?
Right. So the Manhattan District Attorney is the prosecutor, the chief law enforcement officer, and it's split up by district. So here in New York City, every district will have its own district attorney, and it's technically governed by the state. So these are state races. And the job of the prosecutor is twofold. On one hand, we decide who to charge, what to charge, and what penalty, if any, is appropriate. It's also the opportunity to set policy. Your district attorney won't be trying cases, but will be establishing policy that is centered around prevention, rehabilitation, and accountability. And so this is extremely important because a prosecutor has what's called prosecutorial discretion, which means you don't need a majority to make change. You'll need one person. And this person has to be someone whose judgment that we can trust, someone who has walked in the shoes of those impacted by this office. So when we talk about decline to prosecute list, discretion in terms of how we handle cases, ensuring that we have one system of justice that will hold everyone accountable, including those who are powerful and privileged. There are a lot of big decisions that a prosecutor makes. Also, when it comes time to prosecution, convictions, and incarceration, These are long-term impacts on families. The decision a prosecutor makes goes well beyond the four corners of that office, comes into our homes, and will dictate the obstacles and opportunities that an individual and their family and their community will have for generations to come. And so this is an election that cannot be taken lightly because these decisions are permanent. And this is an election that all voices must be represented and heard.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that overview because it is so much more than just prosecuting criminal activity. This is about safety. It's about justice. And it's also about caring for people because every individual has a story about how they came to be in the criminal justice system. And there's just it's so important for prosecutors to have a big picture of people's lives. You've said that you want to completely transform the office of the district attorney. So talk to us about what that means. What does that mean for you? What does transformation in this office mean?
First and foremost, it means electing people with lived experiences, people who have walked in the shoes of those impacted by this office, victims and accused alike, people beyond just prosecuting and defense, but public health professionals, social workers, teachers, people that, when we say it takes a village to raise a child, that's the village that needs to be present in our policies because our policies impact everyone. And one thing that I want to move away from is the automation of our justice system. There's a crime, we come in after the fact, the focus is on revenge punishment or just outdoing the harm. Oftentimes, victims are cut out of that process. And majority of the cases in Manhattan end in a plea. And these pleas have fines and fees attached to them. And so it is essentially debt collecting. And we never get to the bottom of why things are happening. There's no real measurement of rehabilitation. We've done extremely poor in protecting victims and ensuring that they have a voice in the decision-making process. And so we need to redo things. And I'm starting with two things. One, ensuring that we establish an advisory council that is representative of the community to make sure that we are together furthering our vision of justice, but also make sure that when we win, I'll be held accountable and held to the promises that I'm making. The second thing I'm going to do is establish what I'm going to call is an arrest review unit. Right now, when the arrest paperwork comes in from the police, we figure out how are we going to turn this into a criminal complaint? How do we charge this? The better question to ask is, what is happening here? What is the cry for help? What are the instabilities we missed before it even became a crime? Is this a case of a false arrest, false allegations? Is there police misconduct here? And then what does the victim want to see happen here? For cases that do move forward, what is the rehabilitation point? What are the alternatives to incarceration here to ensure that we are getting to the root causes? And if a person ends up being incarcerated, that we've ensured not only rehabilitation, but successful entry back into the community. So these are tons of big decisions. This is the triage center of the district attorney's office and where a lot of the changes can happen.
I really appreciate that approach because it's exactly as you emphasized, every individual has a story about their past trauma, their economic position that gets them into the criminal justice system, and having that system is really important. What you talked about, that advisory, that evaluation, that's got cross methodologies. That's really important because we're going to be really looking at recovery in our city. So that's a really good program. Now I'm going to pivot a little to my favorite subject, which is the protection of reproductive freedom in America. Now, it may seem a little strange to be talking about reproductive freedom, abortion rights in a conversation about a Manhattan district attorney, but Vote Pro-Choice analyzed all of the candidates who are running, and you are without a doubt the person that understands these issues the best. So as you know, and I want all of the folks that are watching today to understand that the Supreme Court is scheduled to hear a case out of Mississippi that will directly challenge the protections of Roe v. Wade, which means by next June, it is very, very likely that Roe v. Wade will be overturned by the Supreme Court. This is not hyperbole. This is not hand-wringing. This is really going to happen. So when a fundamental human right lacks the necessary legal protections like reproductive freedom, or it's been made to be inaccessible by all the restrictions that are out there across the country, what can a district attorney do to protect everyone's freedom? And what would you do to protect reproductive freedom in Manhattan and lead outside of Manhattan if necessary?
Yes, I think this is a crucial issue that is coming up, and one that is going to show exactly the importance of what a district attorney can do. So when we talked about the prosecutorial discretion earlier, this is where the district attorney decides what to charge. And in the event that Roe v. Wade is overturned and we have laws that are established that restrict freedom and infringe on body autonomy, the district attorney's office is the office that will decide whether these criminal acts, or what are alleged to be criminal acts, could actually be charged. And we can take a stand, and I will take a stand, that we will not criminalize abortion and those who seek abortion. This is not something that can have a blanket response. And I've always talked about moving the country away from the knee-jerk reaction to say, we just need more police, more prosecution, more incarceration as the answer to our society's issues. Well, abortion is a diverse conversation. That's everything from your choice whether to terminate pregnancy to rape and incest and the health of the person carrying. And so there's so many different variations that to blanket it with criminal liability is reckless. And it's what I feel is unlawful. And it's something that as a civil rights attorney, I have always fought against government intrusions and the government's attempt to restrict our freedoms. And this is something that I take serious. And as district attorney, I will not engage in the criminal prosecution of people who are part of or seeking abortion, whether it's the receptionist at the clinic all the way to the person carrying who has to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. And the reason why we want to have this conversation and why we at Vote Pro-Choice think it's so important to be supporting district attorneys that are committed to reproductive freedom and justice like you are is because we don't want law enforcement going into the hospitals investigating every miscarriage in America. And that's the direction that we're leading. So thank you for making that clear. And we want to make sure the viewers are clear about what's at stake and why it's so important to be focusing on these criminal justice races. So back to you. So now let's talk about how unique this race is and the fact that the Manhattan District Attorney has only ever been occupied by white men. So, you know, I have been focusing my whole life on electing down ballot women of color and women. So what does it mean for us in New York City for a woman of color to be elected to this position? And what's it like for you? And what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I feel like this moment in particularly in New York City's history, we have an opportunity to elect new leadership in New York City that is reflective of those who live here, that is really diverse, and brings the village to the table. I grew up never seeing someone like me on a stage like this, running for an office like this. For us, this is a historic campaign, but for me, it was about elevating the voices of the impacted community, not to be spoken for, but to speak with our communities and to lead. And it's been an interesting experience. I think having only ever had white men who are district attorneys of Manhattan set a tone of exclusion. And there's a mold here. And every time we've come up for interviews or every time we've pushed our campaign, some are still attempting to measure our campaign and my candidacy with this mold. And we tell them all the time, we're not going to fit. And that's the point. We are here to break the mold. We are here to expand the conversation, to include women of color, to include people from the impacted community, because these lived experiences are something that comes with us wherever we are in life. And to have an office like this that is making pretty permanent and serious decisions on people's lives, that is deciding the fate of victims when they make reports, or people who are going to be charged and prosecuted, we need somebody that breaks the mold and is going to do things differently and bring new leadership to Manhattan. So it's been, for me, inspiring to see how many people, one, share my story, two, align with our values, but three, really want to see leadership in New York City that reflects everyone else, particularly women and women of color.
It truly is so important. And, you know, as we face this election, it really is about the future of New York City and the vision we want to see. You and I were talking earlier about how there's data coming out that the voters right now are new voters who've never voted before. So how important it is to really have candidates that voters are inspired by and hold a vision of a city that's new and where we can evolve. Particularly with this pandemic, the way that it's hit our city, it's going to be so important to have innovative perspectives.
Right.
So, you know, but this is going to be a big challenge. We have lots of challenges. So in your opinion, what is the biggest challenge facing the district attorney's office? And why is it important for someone who has a progressive perspective to be elected and to tackle those challenges?
So we have two semi-big problems. I've been told I'm an optimist, so I think that we will overcome these problems, but they're twofold. First is people, like you said, are coming out of a pandemic. We are fatigued. We are concerned. There's a lot of uncertainty about what our future will look like. Our children's schools have been disrupted. People are facing unemployment. We're told there's been a spike in crime, not just in New York City, but across the country. And this is an opportunity to create new systems and transform systems, because the normal is what got us here. During the state of people and our voters, we have police unions and those who are proponents of tough on crime rhetoric pushing that and saying, well, we need more police, we need more prosecution, we need more prisons. And so whatever money, pump it into the carceral system, because that's the only thing in their minds that equate to public safety. And what that cuts out of the conversation is, well, how about money for victims and for support services and for addressing root causes of crime? Communities that don't feel safe around police. And what about police accountability and police brutality? And so we have to push back on the fear-mongering and the rhetoric that is attempting to take advantage of people's concerns and uncertainties, because the just not true. More policing, more prosecution, and more prisons have not impacted public safety. But addressing the root causes of crimes, focusing on rehabilitation, having restorative justice methods, and alternatives to incarceration, public safety for the long term. And it also focuses on healing the victim, right? We can't just parade victims around to further these tough on crime talking points, but to come and say, what are we going to do to make you and your community feel safe? And so we're pushing back. My concern has been in hearing the rhetoric in a lot of races, not just ours, where some candidates are defaulting to advocating for racist policies to come back, like stop and frisk, and advocating for more police to just be inundating our communities. And I push. If you look at the safest neighborhoods in Manhattan or across this country, you won't see the heavy police presence. You will see good schools, high employment rates, mental health programs, substance use programs, after school programs. You will see communities that are engaged and invested in. And that's what we need to bring to New York City. And that is where the focus of our recovery should be. The second fight that we're up against here is Wall Street. We have a candidate in this race who is Wall Street's favorite candidate, who is a billionaire, and has pumped millions of dollars into this very race. And we need to be concerned about that, not only because of the conflicts of interest that can arise, but this is an office that's going to be in part responsible for holding Wall Street accountable. And we cannot have a friend of theirs running this office. And so pushing back on that money and pushing back on the fear-mongering and rhetoric so that we can actually focus on what is happening in our city, what is in the best interest of everyone who lives here, while also addressing the racial disparities is a paramount concern for me and my campaign now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. That was those are important challenges to overcome, and it is really important to have progressive perspectives in this position for sure. We actually have some questions from the viewers out there, so thank you. Please keep posting them. We're watching, and we're happy to include those in this conversation. The district attorney always has a relationship with law enforcement, right, and it can be fraught. Right. And I, side note, I grew up in a family that had a lot of law enforcement in it, and there was always lots of talk about those lawyers, So we do have some questions. If you could cover, like, what is your relationship with the police going to be? Let's talk a little bit about all that.
Yes. And this is extremely important. And let me take a step back and set up the interaction with police and civilians. And so as a civil rights attorney, part of my work is to address excessive force cases. And so when officers engage in this misconduct, we hold them accountable. So whether it was termination, discipline, or even prosecution, we made sure that we held officers accountable. Because although they are civil servants, they are guided by the same law, and they cannot be put above the law. Now, for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, we might work with law enforcement, but we don't work for law enforcement. And it's imperative that this office remain neutral. So we will establish a police accountability and a prosecutor accountability unit, which will be separate from the office, which means our prosecutors that work to hold police accountable will not be working with these very same officers to charge and prosecute other cases. And this will ensure that independence. But let's talk about that moment that police come into contact with civilians. Officers are allowed to carry a weapon. They can discharge the weapon. They can restrict your freedom. You can be stopped, searched, seized, and then you're introduced to the criminal justice system. Oftentimes, these criminal complaints rely on the word of an officer. Also, in the event of misconduct, they are indemnified by taxpayer dollars. And so there's a lot of protection, a lot of power, and a lot of cover on that one side of the interaction. On the other side, it's you, the civilian, and whatever you have in your pocket. So that great imbalance of power and protection has to have a checks and balance on it. And that's what the district attorney's office must do, is to ensure that we don't put the badge above the law, that we are that neutral territory, that as we sift through the arrest paperwork, we look for wrongdoing on the part of the officer too. What is the history of this officer? What are the demographics of the person being stopped? What is the substance of the evidence? And really take the time to seriously dissect that and pull data from it so that we can identify policies and practices. And if they're racist, then we change them. If law enforcement has not been held accountable, then we push to hold them accountable. And I will tell you, as somebody that has done this for a long time, there are people behind these decisions. There are lawyers in their legal teams that know when something is wrong, they're willing to change it. And that's how we will run this relationship under my administration.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you for covering that. We have another question from the viewers. This is a civics education question. What's the difference between a district attorney and an attorney general, which you could certainly run for someday?
Yes, so the Attorney General deals with civil liability. So there are a lot of lawsuits that the Attorney General will bring in. So you'll see our Attorney General, Letitia James, conducted a historic hearing about police accountability in response to the George Floyd protest. And then she brought a lawsuit thereafter in federal court to address those concerns. The district attorney's job is criminal liability. So the penal code here that decides, if there's criminal conduct and an officer arrests somebody for it, or there's investigation triggered by our office, then we will follow the accountability through the criminal procedures. So criminal versus civil in a nutshell.
You know what? That was the best description I've ever heard between those two positions. Thank you. And very helpful for all of our viewers, I'm sure. I have one more audience question. This is actually about all of the anti-trans bills that are blanketing our country right now. Terrible, hateful stuff. Can a district attorney protect trans kids against all these anti-trans bills that we're seeing across the country? Is that a role that this office can play?
I think that the district attorney's office can always be used as a bully pulpit to push back on these abusive policies. I think, oftentimes we're told to kind of stay in your lane, but when you look at the trickle-down effect of bullying, harassment, sometimes police harassment, we banned the Walking While Trans bill here in New York City because it was disproportionately impacting our trans community. And it was allowing NYPD units like the Vice unit to really engage in some egregious conduct. And so by synthesizing this data, by declining to prosecute charges that are targeting our trans community, we send the message that that stops under our administration and we take a stand against it. And then we can use that opportunity to push with our advocates and organizers to change the laws and to ensure that we expand protections for our trans community. So I always think there's something we can do one way or another, and to at a minimum show our opposition and our objection to these abusive laws is something that a district attorney should always stand up to do.
Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, and can you talk about the Walking While Trans bill? What is that? Can you explain to folks what happened?
Yes, so we had a bill here, and it comes from the loitering charge, which is a low-level offense, and oftentimes police were targeting people for loitering who might have been engaged in sex work, and it was falling squarely on our trans community, women of color, sex workers, and that's what gave rise to a lot of abuses in the NYPD Vice unit. And so our lawmakers got together and really pushed extremely hard, and our organizers on the ground to repeal that law. And so that was recently passed, and it was a great victory, but we can do more. And that's a perfect way of, and then from that, the district attorney's office now declined to prosecute charges relating to sex work. And so that's a perfect way to show how we can work with organizers and advocates on the ground and with our lawmakers and the district attorney's office to execute on changing policy that has been abusive and one that can instead work to protect our communities.
Oh, thank you for that explanation. Yes, it's obviously a very important bill and a very important role for district attorneys to play. We're actually coming to an end of our discussion today, but I want to give you a chance to share anything else about critical policy positions that you want the viewers to know about, and anything else you want them to know about the race. And then we'll talk a little bit about how they're going to vote in a minute.
Okay, excellent. Well, this is going to be the perfect opportunity for us to move away from the tough on crime mentality, the prosecutor only type experience, and elect somebody that is going to be independent from the power structures, from the pressures of the NYPD and the pressures of Wall Street to look the other way, and instead have somebody that will be responsive to the concerns of New York City. I think this is going to be a checks and balance on the mayor's race, on other races going on in our city. And so we need everybody to truly get out and vote. And, you know, oftentimes these races center around a conversation of making those who are safe and comfortable more safe and comfortable. But there are thousands of families in Manhattan and across the city that have been targeted, disproportionately targeted and impacted by arrests, prosecutions, and incarceration. And that is dictating what their futures and the futures of their families will look like. So we have to take addressing the racial disparities very serious. We have to take police accountability serious. We have to ensure that we have somebody that will hold Wall Street accountable and protect our immigrant communities, especially from issues like wage theft and worker exploitations. And so this is the historic moment to do that. And we need all hands on deck. We are in early voting right now. It started June 12th. It'll continue until June 20th. And Election Day is June 22nd. So 7 days to go. Next Tuesday is Election Day.
Yep. And of course, voting has always been complicated in New York City and in New York State. And it's only been in the last couple of years that we've had more voter education, access to early voting. It's getting better. But tricky part about this race is that it is a state race. So it does not have ranked choice voting. So the New York City races will all have ranked choice voting, but not this one.
Right.
So you will be voting for one person for district attorney on now, early voting, or June 22nd. So actually, will you have to have a runoff?
No, and you know what? Also, one thing I'll say, we are number 6 on the ballot. So to help people remember who are voting, just pick 6.
Great. So it is absolutely critical for folks to not get confused. June now, New Yorkers can early vote now. They can vote on Election Day, which is June 22nd. This is not a ranked choice vote, so you're going for number 6, Tahanie Aboushi, for district attorney. It's a critically important race. Now, is there anything else you want to talk about with regard to voting, or what else, if you're not a New Yorker, a New York voter, what can you do to support your race?
Well, we are 7 days left to voting, and we really need all hands on deck. If you have capacity to volunteer, help us phone bank or text people. If you are in New York City and you have some time to help us pick up canvassing shifts or poll watching shifts, that would be a huge help. And we need donations. We need as much support as possible. We are really up against some serious Wall Street money. And we don't take Wall Street money. We don't take corporate PAC money. We are purely grassroots, led by the impacted community. So this is that fight where do we let that Wall Street money come in and just inundate us and drown out the voices of the rest of us who live here? Or are we going to push through and show that we're going to outwork that money and have a district attorney for all New Yorkers?
Yeah, this is truly an important race. So thank you for being here with us, explaining your positions, and I'm glad that the act.tv viewers were able to get a sense of the importance of this race, the options that they have, and your progressive values. It's really exciting to get to know you, and I'm glad others get to know you as well. Now, again, I am the CEO of Vote Pro-Choice. We're very happy to have endorsed Tahanie in this race. We have created a slate that you can use. So I need to go to the ballot. It's voteprochoice.co/NYC-2021. We'll make sure that this is on all of the platforms that you're watching this on, so you can easily get access to it. But again, remember, New Yorkers are voting now early, and Election Day is June 22nd. You'll be voting for Tahanie Aboushi for District Attorney on line number 6. Thank you so much for being with us, Tahanie, and good luck to you in this next week.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure, and I love the question. So thank you so much for this great conversation.
Yeah. Take good.